everybody, and welcome to Arctic Base Camp. This is one of our first events this year. It's nice to see everybody in big numbers, and I'm very happy that we're starting with kind of outreach and citizen science, something that's really close to my heart as well, and it's Walrus from Space, and we have two wonderful presenters here today for you. We have Rod from WWF, and we have Hannah from British Antarctic Survey, BAS, who are going to walk you through what they do and how they do it, and hopefully get you all to sign up and help them count Walrus from space.
Thank you very. Am I on this? Yeah. So thank you very much, Lovro. It's a real pleasure and an honour to be here presenting at Arctic Base Camp. We've been supporting the project for a number of years, and it's just such a great project. So I couldn't think of anywhere better to be launching the next phase of this project. So my name's Rod Downey. I lead the polar programme for WWF, based in the UK. I'm joined by Dr. Hannah Kubain. Hannah is one of the world's experts in the use of remote sensing to count wildlife. So, as always, a huge privilege to be sharing a stage with you and with our absent friend, who you can see on the screen, Dr. Peter Fretwell. And we're going to talk you through the Walrus from Space project, and we're using today to do an official launch of phase 2 of the project, which Hannah will speak about. But the project aims to better understand walrus, how they're responding to the climate crisis today, and how they might respond in a climate-altered future. But first of all, before we go into that, some of you might not be familiar with walrus, so let's introduce you. So they're an iconic species of the Arctic, also of immense cultural importance and significance to Arctic people, many of whom live in very close proximity to walrus. They're, of course, very easily recognizable by their huge size. Some of these big guys can weigh 1.5 tons. And also the magnificent tusks that you can see there. And the tusks are actually they're enlarged upper canine. They use ice as a platform for mating on and for breeding. They rarely venture far from the coast or far from the shallow waters of the continental shelf, because that's where they go to feed. That's where they find their food. They're really good divers. They can dive to depths of 100 meters or more, but typically they'll do very short, shallow dives down to 10 or 20 meters, and they feed on the seabed, and they feed mostly on things like on the seabed, and they feed mostly on things like mollusks and clams, sea snails, soft-shell crabs, sea cucumbers, and other invertebrates. And they've got a voracious appetite, so they can consume 1,000 clams in one sitting. Some of the large. Then around here, from the coast of Canada, stretching across to Greenland, Svalbard in the Norwegian Arctic, and into western Russia, you've got the Atlantic walrus. And then you've got this third group called the Laptev walrus. Now, most of the research points to them being the westernmost extent of the Pacific walrus, but they're certainly a distinct evolutionary group. So for management and conservation purposes, we treat them separately. But the scope of our project is to focus solely on the Atlantic and the Laptev walrus. And this is the problem. So Arctic people and Arctic nature are feeling the full force of the climate crisis. So the region is warming somewhere between 3 and 4 times the global average. Sea surface temperatures are rising, and that means that sea ice, so frozen ocean, is in very rapid decline. And it's declining throughout the year, in all seasons. It's particularly declining during the summer months, when we're seeing a loss of about 13% per decade. And that is really bad news for Arctic nature, for Arctic people. But it's also bad news for the rest of the world, because, of course, sea ice, the Arctic acts like a global thermostat. So the sea ice, it reflects the sun's energy back out to space and helps to regulate the temperature of the planet. And what we're doing is we're replacing that bright, white, reflective surface of the sea ice with the dark blue of the ocean. And that's further absorbing heat, increasing the temperature of the oceans, and therefore increasing the temperature of the planet as a whole. But let's come back down to Earth and back to our walrus. they're really feeling the loss of the sea ice. So as I said earlier, they use it for breeding, they use it for giving birth on, and they use it for resting on between feeding trips. But increasingly, what we're seeing around the Arctic is that in certain parts of the Arctic, at least, walrus are coming onshore in much larger numbers and more often and in more places around the Arctic. Now, you know, walrus are very social animals. They're used to being in large groups. But one of the problems that we're going to face is that as the beaches become overcrowded, you know, we're talking about sometimes 5, 10, 20,000 walrus packing out a beach. And if those walrus get spooked, if they get scared, whether that's by human disturbance, so perhaps through aircraft or shipping activities, or whether they get disturbed by a predator, such as a polar bear, they're going to stampede. And as they stampede towards the coast, they're going to crush many of the young cubs. And we're seeing a lot of mortality of cubs as a result. Also, because they're spending longer on land, they have to travel further and therefore expend more energy in order to get to their food sources, especially as their food sources become locally depleted around the beaches where they're on. And then on top of this, we've got the Arctic Ocean is becoming more acidic. And that's really bad news for shell-building animals like clams, like mussels, exactly the sorts of food sources that walrus depend upon. And then layered on top of all of this, becomes a place for scientists to work. So that's why we've, through the British Antarctic Survey and WWF, we've teamed up with Maxar, a satellite imagery provider. And at this point, I'll just hand over to Hannah to move into the next phase of the project.
Thank you, Rod. Hi, everyone. So yeah, to try and find walruses, we decided to get images of all the places where we know they come and haul out on land. So that's where they gather on land in small or bigger groups. Only for the Atlantic and the Laptev Sea for a start. So first, we needed to know where to get imagery from. So all the brown dots you see here are where we know walrus have come to land. And that's usually in the summer when there's less sea ice around and they can't find it. So they'll just try and find somewhere on the rocky shores or beaches. So we gave all these points to Maxar and asked them to get loads of imagery for us. We started in 2020, summer 2020, when it was quite difficult to go out in the field. So that's another big advantage of using satellite images is when you can't go and do your field work, you can still get some eyes on the ground or in the sky to look at the ground. So here what you see is all the red dots are where we could get good quality images. And by this we mean that there were no clouds or they were not too dark, because in the Arctic it can be quite cloudy. So that was a bit of a challenge, but we made it. We were quite happy. 86% of all these brown points I showed earlier, we got imagery for. And the aim is to repeat this every summer. So back in 2021, we did some improvements in our method, and we got a lot better coverage. So this time 96.6. So we're able to get images of the places where we want to detect and count walruses. So that's good news. And now, here's a nice image of walrus. So that's an island in Russia, and you can see this brown blob there. That's walrus. And if I zoom in, you can see each individual one that looks a bit like a grain of rice. So you see the power of using very high resolution satellite images, because they capture images with 30 to 50 centimeter resolution. So when you think of an adult walrus, female and male being between 3 and 4 meters, suddenly you can see them. But we got a lot of imagery to go through, and we thought, what's best, like the power of the public, the power of the crowd. So back in 2021, October 2021, we launched our first crowdsourcing campaign where anyone around the world could search through images of the Arctic. I was going to say walruses, but no, of the Arctic that may have walrus, and let us know if they think, yes or no, I can find walrus, not see them. And really pleased, that was the imagery from 2020. The crowd did find the walrus, so that's one big group on a sandy shore. That's a fairly, out of these like 500,000, there's been a few images where the crowd found walruses, and now you can count them. And it looks this time like this. Every images will have walrus, and you can either choose to put a point if the walrus look quite like distinct from each other, But sometimes you can see they might form a bit more of a group, so the yellow polygon. So we're offering people the option to draw a polygon. And before you do this, there's a small training so you can go through each of the buttons and what is expected, and also a bit more about the project and Walrus in general. So later, stay afterwards and we can show you. And to validate all these counts we're going to get, we went to Svalbard this summer. The aim was to get a comparison of counts from drone images to satellite images. So we went all the way to Ny-Ålesund. I don't know if you can see on the yellow map. So, I mean, does everyone know where Svalbard is? It's this archipelago of Norway, quite far enough. And then once we were from Ny-Ålesund, our aim was to visit some of these points that we knew were holdouts where Walrus were expected to be, because scientists from Norway do survey them fairly regularly and could tell us where it was best to go. And so that's us from the drone. And we got immensely lucky because the first night we went out, we did find the Walrus. And it was a clear blue sky, which meant if the satellite was passing over, they could capture an image. And they did. So within 15 minutes apart, we have our drone image and our satellite image. And while the satellite image was captured, we were still on land, so we knew that none of the Walrus had moved much. So we know we're able to compare. So that's one of the imagery from the trip that we got. You can see how they're like all cuddled together, and you got some also in the shallow waters. But the satellite image, that was really impressive. So I was telling you we were still on land when that imagery was captured. So here you see the group of Walrus called a holdout. And here, that's us. There's some of us walking back to where we left our stuff. And that's our boat ready to come pick us up. So really pleased with this, I guess, little bit of luck that played on our side. Because for years, we've tried to do this, not for the Walrus, but for other wildlife from space project, and it's quite difficult. So this is going to give us immensely good data for this project. So really, really pleased. And now we have a nice little video from this summer's trip that we're going to show you.
Walrus are an iconic species of the Arctic. They're a key species in the Arctic marine ecosystem, and they're of immense significance and importance to Arctic people. But they're increasingly vulnerable to the implications of climate change. They're really living on the front line of the climate crisis. That's why we decided to launch the Walrus from Space project. What we're trying to do is to better understand walrus, how they're responding to the climate crisis now, and how they might respond in a climate-altered future. Now, that's a really difficult thing to do because the Arctic is vast. It's a difficult place for scientists to work, and we know that walrus can be very easily disturbed by human presence. That's why we've teamed up with a satellite imagery provider. We can cover a vast scope of hundreds of places where walrus haul out across the Arctic. We can capture them through imagery from space. One of the biggest advantages of this project is that it's completely uninvasive to the walrus themselves. The reason that we've travelled up to Svalbard is to help to verify the satellite imagery accounts. So what we're doing is that we're flying drones over the walrus haulouts at about 55 meters altitude where we know it won't disturb the walrus, and that helps us to get really accurate counts for these particular haulouts. We can then compare that to the counts from the satellite imagery, and that helps us to calibrate the counts and therefore make it more accurate for the population estimate.
It's the hardest thing of the day is getting into these suits.
On the first day that we came out in the boats, it was a beautiful sunny day, and that's important because it meant that the satellite images were absolutely fantastic, crystal clear. When we got here, we were able to do 2 successful drone flights and get really accurate imagery of the site.
During this expedition in Svalbard, my role is to fly the UAV, or the drones. With satellite technology, we see that we're able to go to places with all these remote species like walrus. Satellite images can give us that every summer, every year. It's quite powerful. Getting yearly data set is what's really important to then understand the trends, especially when the environment is changing.
We've had an absolutely amazing, successful trip. It's just been phenomenal. It's been off the scale. The timing of the satellite imagery coincided absolutely perfectly with the time that we were here. And in fact, we could see ourselves and our boat in the satellite imagery. We have this perfect calibration and verification of these images, which is just going to be great for the project and will really help to advance the project into the future.
After 2 years of looking at them in satellite imagery, seeing the walrus for the first time, yeah, that was pretty exciting. I just didn't want to leave. I just wanted to stay with them all day.
There are immense challenges ahead as we face the climate crisis. It's going to take a massive amount of ambition. It's going to require governments and businesses around the world to keep their promises. And we're going to have to restore nature to help us do that and to work with nature. When we come together, we can find solutions, and that brings me hope.
Great. Thanks everyone. So just kind of wrapping up a little bit and coming back to the sea ice, which is a kind of core theme here. But so we're going to be repeating this every year for the next 5 years at least, and that'll help us to get a much better understanding of the trends of walrus populations. And once we've done that, we can then start to overlay that with some of the sea ice models to better understand the habitat preference of the walrus. And that'll help us to then project what's going to happen to them into the future. And then we can take that into the policy arenas and start to look at sort of management tools and management decisions. And just to summarize it, of course, the climate crisis is so much bigger than any one individual species or even any one region of the world. It's a global issue. But increasingly, we recognise that the climate crisis and the loss of biodiversity are not separate issues. They're two sides of the same coin, and the solutions need to address both areas. And certainly, in a place like Davos, at the World Economic Forum, when we've got some of the biggest businesses and companies in the world coming together, we need to really get them to commit to meeting the promises that they've already made, and to really tackle climate change and the biodiversity crisis head on. So thank you very much all for coming in person. Thank you to those who are watching as the event's being live streamed. And Hannah and I are very happy to answer any questions. And I'd also, for those of you in the room, just a reminder that Hannah's offered to talk you through the platform on one of our tablets after the event if you'd like to. So thank you.
Hi, great presentation, really, really interesting. I was just wondering, from previous surveys of walrus before you guys started doing with satellite imagery, I guess, were you able to see kind of what the discrepancies were? Like, are you getting much better results now than you were before? Just wondering.
The Walrus from Space project is quite new and early, so we're working on the results right now, so we haven't got any to really compare. But already one thing I can say is from the first search campaign, we did find in some of the places that we thought were abandoned and they didn't go anymore, we did find walrus. So that's something that's quite handy for us, because at the moment scientists that survey walrus to make sure they can find them and do the survey they need to do, they'll go to the places they're 100% sure they'll be there. And so we can let them know about the other places they might be.
Yeah, I'll just add to that as well, that we don't have global trends for walrus, so we have kind of some understanding of trends at a regional scale. But this is one of the advantages of this project, is that we're going at really big scale to better understand those trends.
Okay, any other questions?
So I was wondering, you said that they breed in the ice that's floating, but now there's less ice, and so they're having to go to shores. Are they changing their habits, do you think? Are you seeing that, or do you hope to find out about that? Like, how these types of habits, are they actually changing those?
Yeah, it's very early on in the project for us to come to any of those sorts of conclusions. But the one change that we really are seeing, as I mentioned in the presentation, is that in parts of the Arctic they're coming ashore in much larger numbers and more often. They breed during the winter, so because winter sea ice is not being as affected as summer sea ice, we're still hopeful at this stage. But it's certainly a factor. Yeah.
Hi, thanks for this presentation. Yeah, I was wondering on the platform online how the citizen scientists, how many of them do you have? How many contribution you got so far? And why they are not allowed to count the number of walrus on the pictures? Because you have high resolution imagery, so you can maybe ask them to go further in the analysis.
About the counting, you should come and have a little go later. You'll realize initially you think you can see them individually, but once you actually try to distinguish, it's a lot harder. So some of them is clear because they're not going to be in a bigger group. And we've seen that this summer when we went to that one hole out in Svalbard. The first day was quite a warm day and they were a bit more spread out. And the other picture I show was a colder day and they were all like close together.
I can attest to this as a participant for the phase 1. This is much more difficult than you would think, because you start enthusiastically and then you're like, oh no, wait, what am I looking at? So yeah, it's definitely a cool challenge.
Yeah. But you can always do the search campaign. This is only a yes/no, so you can do that.
You're asking about the number of people who have signed up so far, I think. Yeah. So I think we have just over 10,000 people so far, walrus detectives, from around the world. I mean, we have people on Easter Island who are counting walrus, or at least searching for walrus. So it's truly a global project. So.
Well, recently in a YouTube video, I have seen polar bears attacking walrus populations. Is this something, because that's quite dangerous for the polar bears as well? Is this something which is maybe a new behavior or a new habit due to the to warming up and the climate problems we have?
It is known that polar bears are one of the walrus predators alongside orcas. Some predators, some polar bears will usually tend to go for the younger walrus, the calves, but then you do have stories of polar bears going for the adults as well. You wanted to add something? Or no?
It's a very simple question, I think. But if the ice is melting, will the walruses get tired from swimming to the nearest shore?
That's actually a really good question because it is one of the worry is that now they might be further away from their feeding grounds. So although they can swim long distances, that's going to require a lot more energy to spend on their part. So then they're going to have to find more food and they're going to have, that's actually a good question. Thank you.
Okay, if there are any more questions, I think you wanted to do a demonstration, or do you want to do that after the live stream ends and just one-on-one?
Yeah, one-on-one. We have a tablet, and then we can also try it on one of the laptops. So if you want to have a go yourself, and then if you like it, you can register.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.